Hey guys, it's Connor over at Soapbox Games, and you already knew that. Welcome back. How you been? How's your mom? Happy Friday. Today I just wanted to make this quick video, given that I have been playing Deathloop, and it is essentially the only game that is being talked about right now on gaming Twitter, which makes 100% sense, given that this is arguably the biggest exclusive to be released by PlayStation this year. Exclusive in quotation marks, since it's technically a timed exclusive. But for the past couple of months, they've had a very long, annoying marketing campaign, and I have been playing it for now for about 10 or so hours. So, let's just get this out of the way at the beginning of the video. I enjoy the game very much. I would even go as far to say as right now, I think I kind of love it. I think when everything is all said and done, it'll end up on my top 5 games of the year. But once again, we'll see. There are still some story implications that might hold that back from actually being in the higher top 5 or the lower top 5. But regardless, today's purpose of this video is to directly speak to those of you watching who are a bit on the fence about the title and want a more honest opinion and maybe a little bit more knowledge about the type of genre this game is. Now, with that said, this is an Arkane Studios game. If you're not familiar with Arkane, they are a very beloved critical darling in the industry that make their bread and butter by making immersive sim games. Now, I don't want to go into the full definition of immersive sim games. Instead, I'll just break it down to what the core objective of the genre is. That being that the game emphasizes player choice above all else, which then by proxy trickles down and affects a multitude of systems that are implemented, which in layman's, right, that just means a game that allows players to approach objectives in multiple ways by doing it their own way. The easiest example, and to just compare Arkane style games, right, immersive sim games, besides other Arkane titles, would be the Deus Ex titles or the first 2 BioShock games, which are excellent in my opinion. Now, hardcore immersive sims, like the games Arkane make, are not for everyone. They are still incredibly niche in gaming, despite the immense influence immersive sims have had on a ton of different genres in gaming. The biggest contribution immersive sims have given games in general is usually their complex level design. The reason that they're usually so niche, at least on consoles in my opinion, comes down to a lot of design choices that were made for PC players in mind, not translating well to a console controller. The 2 most common complaints are usually about the movement controls. A lot of people think these games feel cumbersome, heavy, or even clunky. Combat in these games are usually nothing to write home about either, and are pretty basic for the most part. These 2 examples are what turns off a lot of people from playing these types of games to begin with, which to me are completely valid. Now, with that said, I think Deathloop's movement is probably the best Arkane has ever done, and I would go as far to say the gunplay is as well. But I fully enjoy immersive sims. Like I said, I think games like Deus Ex and BioShock are absolutely fantastic when it comes to that style. Now, Arkane style in particular, like I said earlier, extremely hit or miss. I like the Dishonored games, but it never really clicked with me. I don't love them, especially when games like Hitman exist out there. And what I mean by that is Dishonored to me always felt like it wanted to punish me for wanting to play the way I wanted. In the first game, there's this light morale system where if you kill too many people, you automatically end up getting the bad ending, which I don't like that shit, especially in games like immersive sims where you're supposed to be able to play how you want to play and not necessarily get penalized for doing such, right? Never really messed around with Dishonored 2 very much, but when Arkane released their 3rd title, Prey, that's when their style of game really clicked for me. Prey is a just amazing, fantastic video game that no one ever played because nobody bought that game. The sales for that game were awful, but it really built up a great cult-like fan base that includes myself, where if Prey is ever brought up in conversation, you'll have a really hard time getting me or anyone, any other fan to shut up about it. I love that game with all of my heart because, in my opinion, it's the perfect immersive sim. And maybe one day I'll end up making a video about Prey if I ever do a second playthrough, but please go buy that game. I'm sure that game is cheap as fuck right now. Buy Prey so I can eventually get a sequel down the line. Okay, thank you. Okay, now that that's out the way, let's actually talk about Deathloop and how I do think this will be Arkane's most divisive game yet. If you were able to ask me, Connor, is this their best game? Connor, is this an evolution of the genre of immersive sims? I would just straight up tell you yes and no in some very key ways. To start out with, yes, I do think this is their most fluid and polished title yet. Gunplay feels tighter, weightier than it has ever felt, especially given in Prey, where Prey felt very similar to games like Deus Ex and the early BioShock games, where it felt very weightless, floaty. Movement and traversal is extremely faster, especially after you get one of the power slabs in particular. With that said, improvements have been made, but ultimately, it's still very much an Arkane game at its DNA, which, depending on how you feel about those, I think it will be a turnoff for a lot of people, right? Almost in every single way, it's still Arkane's DNA, right? Down to the level design, down to the mission design, down to the way characters look, down to the way buildings look, right? Another element that I think is going to turn off a lot of people in this game is that it is 100% a roguelike. It's not a little bit like a roguelike. It's not 50% like a roguelike, like the early coverage and marketing tried to make it out. It's 100% a roguelike, like hands down. And to me, I think that they handle a lot of the roguelike elements very well. At least narratively, it fits and it makes sense. Once again, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of those elements because eventually I will do a review and I'll have a lot more fleshed out thoughts then. But if I had to compare the roguelike elements to any other within that genre, I would say Deathloop is extremely similar in structure to Hades. It's a mix of some really interesting sci-fi narrative elements that slowly get dripped out to you, along with some permanent unlocks such as different guns, different power slabs, different perks, so on and so forth, that make the player actually feel like they're progressing instead of just repeating the same shit over and over. But, man, I can't talk about an Arkane game without talking about the level design, because that's what really stands out above all else in this game. Each map has so many layers to it that each time I go back into one of these areas, I keep finding new ways to tackle certain situations. It's actually probably the biggest motivator to keep going into these maps over and over again. Finding new weapons, info on the targets, paths, etc. are really cool, and it really does lend itself to the time loop theme of the story. But man, this game is an interesting one because I think it's pretty addictive to play. Like how a roguelike should be. It should be easy. It should be like, all right, let's do this again. Let's do this again. And in a weird way, that's exactly how this game feels. The best way I can describe the gameplay loop, to me at least, is just pure fun. But take what I say with a grain of salt. I like this game, but I'm also not the biggest roguelike fan. So if I'm here telling you that it's pretty good, my guy. But Arkane is able to mix a nice amount of linearity into Deathloop that helps break up the pace of just repeating the same maps over and over again, trying to find new info on your targets. Now, I'm kind of just going to go off script with this one to try and wrap this video up, right? If you've, like I've said, have been on the fence about Deathloop, it's hard to convey this through a video given just how much hands-on time you need with this game before you make a decision, and it's weird. I'm assuming when it eventually comes to Game Pass, I think that will be probably the best option for a lot of people to play this game. If I was to say, should you spend $70 on it? I would say yes, because I do believe in supporting the devs, especially a studio like Arkane, who, whether you like their games or not, they're top-notch at what they do. They're the best of the best in that field. But it's like, Connor, I've seen the marketing. It looks like a straight up linear shooter. It's not that. I find the marketing for this game pretty misleading. and not the best describer. There was a Twitter space the morning of the game when it launched where Pete Hines and a couple of the developers were talking, essentially saying, and Pete Hines was essentially saying, yeah, it was pretty hard to like try and market this game to a mainstream audience, since this is, you know, in the vein of Returnal, a big, huge AAA roguelike game. And those don't necessarily sell the greatest, especially given that we haven't had that many big budget one of these. I feel like if you've taken the information that I've given you, like I said, just general broad strokes of the structure of Deathloop, and you're saying to yourself, yeah, I kind of like that. I feel like you'll like this game. I feel like you'll have a good time with this game. I don't know if you'll love this game. I think you do need to kind of have some fanfare for Arkane and their style, especially to appreciate a lot of the different elements that this game mixes, right? It's mixing a lot of things from Dishonored mainly, you know, a lot of the traversal elements, but then it's mixing in some of the gunplay from Prey, and it's mixing in a lot of the level design elements of Dishonored, along with sort of the linear narrative structure on how to take out certain targets of Dishonored, right? It's all of those things basically combined together to make this baby that ends up being Deathloop. And I think for the most part, it works, right? I think the parts that it doesn't work are very few, because, and I understand, and once again, I'll have more to say when I have an actual review, but I can easily see how this game got 10s. Like right now, personally for me, it's probably hovering in that area. I'm not going to put an actual number, but it's in that higher out of 10 scope right now for me. And I can easily see why, because there's, aside from some performance issues on console and PC really has it the worst. I can easily, the game is just so fluid. The game is just so much fun. And you tie that in with some of the really good writing of the two main characters, it's really good. And so I think I'm just going to leave this video at that before I get a little bit frustrated with how I want to describe this without actually going into my impressions, right? And I think if I was to do that, we would be here for a much longer time, but be on the lookout for a Deathloop review in the next couple of weeks. I also have a few reviews and retrospectives in the can. I have a Spider-Man Miles Morales one. I have a Ghost of Tsushima one. I have a Mass Effect one. Those are taking a lot longer than I would have hoped. But if you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. I would very much appreciate that. Leave me a comment down below so we can go back and forth. And you know, if you've played the game, let me know what you think. Also, I do weekly uploads, like I said, if you're new here. So please be on the lookout. And until then, man, stay groovy.